Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Folks, welcome back to Making Data Simple. Today, I got something very different. We are diving deep into the frontier of applied neuroscience in brain optimization. When I said deep, I meant deep. At least it's deep for me. It's not exactly my sweet spot, but I'm super interested in this, as I'm sure many of you are as well. I was thinking about this before the podcast, and I think mental health has really relied almost entirely on subjective reporting and biochemistry and that kind of thing. But what happens if you combine elite engineering, data analytics, and real-time physics to actually look at the shape of the brain, right? Our guests today are pioneers that are doing exactly that. Dr. Nicholas Dogris and Dr. Tiff Thompson, they're the brilliant minds behind NeuroField, the NeuroField ecosystem, I should say. I believe this to be a triad of companies consisting of, and this is going to be a tongue twister for me, so I'm going to do my best, NeuroField Inc., NeuroField Neurotherapy, and the School of Neurotherapy. And together they have pioneered multimodal neurostimulation, merging advanced brain mapping with targeted low-intensity electromagnetic and light therapies that help the brain rewire itself. So said simply, and this is the way I interpret it, they design and build FDA-cleared medical devices and sophisticated software used by thousands of clinicians worldwide to retrain brain behavior. Boy, that was tough for me. I don't know if I've had a tougher one. All right, Nick and Tiff, thank you for being here. Welcome to the podcast. That's a lot. Like I said, you may have to steer me a little bit, but I'm super interested. Please introduce yourself. I'll start with you, Tiff. Why don't you go first? Don't leave anything out. And please also correct anything that I may have said incorrectly, since I butchered most of that anyway.
Oh my gosh, don't leave anything out. My story is one where I found my way into this career as this was a backup career that I'm in right now, right? So. Wow. Yeah, my first career was in corporate America doing renewable wind energy developing, which I was chuffed with, but it really wasn't for me ultimately. Long story short, I found my way into neurotherapy, and it was kind of like falling in love and being married at the same time, where I had this successful six-figure salary and a successful career, and I found this thing that I knew that I had to do. And so I pivoted, and I went from making a lot of money to making no money to find my way in this career. I went into debt, and I ended up sort of, clawing my way through more school. I've been through a lot of school at that point, but I went through more school. I ended up getting a PhD. And all of it really was for the love of reading raw EEG, reading brain data. And I met Nick along the way. And he had a company called NeuroField. And I'd been doing some neurotherapy, but to no great avail. I think that my results were mediocre at best, working with patients. And I thought, I don't know if I really want to stick into this, which is mostly neurofeedback at that time. And what Nick was doing with his company NeuroField at the time was just PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic field. And so he was actually changing the brain by giving it what he wanted to give it. Anyway, I mean, I met Nick, teamed up with him. I opened a clinic in 2013, and now that's over a decade old. He and I began a school together where we teach neurotherapy and computational neuroanalysis to clinicians. We had 2 kids, 2 boys who are now 4 and 7. And, the rest is history, and the future. So that's me in a nutshell. What
is it like living with a neuroscientist is what I want to know.
Well, we're both neuroscientists, so it's actually really satisfying.
If you're one of your children, like 2 boys, right, they got to be like, oh, they're psychoanalyzing me right now again. Just leave me alone.
They have absolutely no interest in that. They're just little.
They just move on
and play and play and play.
Yeah.
All right, so go ahead, Nick. Your turn.
Gosh, I started back when the Earth was cooling. My first IBM computer was an 8086 processor or 8088 processor that I built myself with the help of this one guy. Anyway, so I've been into computers for a very long time, and I started at my first master's degree was at Humboldt State University, where I studied event-related potentials and ran a study and got into EEG then. I was going to go into NASA and become an astronaut, and I wanted to study, EEG in space. And then I quickly learned that was the military, and I'm not military, so I diverted from that path and came back and jumped into the clinical side. and started getting my PhD in the early 90s. And I met Margaret Ayers. Margaret will go down in history as the mother of neurofeedback. And she was the one I started with. And I watched her do things that defied everything I had learned in my training. And she basically told me that everything I knew about the brain was wrong. And I watched her take a person out of a level 2 coma in a matter of hours using a neurofeedback technique. And this is back in 1990.
Wow.
So yeah, it blew my mind, and diverted my course into another trajectory where I began to go into the clinical world, and I became a psychologist and neuroscientist. And but in 2002, my eldest son was born premature with a hypoxic brain injury. And when that happened, I knew that he was injured, and I knew that it was going to be something where everything I knew how to do wasn't going to be enough. Because in order to treat something like that, you have to have the person, they have to be old enough to engage in the training. And there's a lot of things that have to be in play in order to use what was considered traditional neurofeedback to treat the brain. And that's what kicked me into gear. And by the time he was about 18 months old, he wasn't walking, and he only spoke about one word. And so at that point, I went headlong into the research and started looking for a way to stimulate his brain. And I came across transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is RTMS. Currently it's the FDA cleared treatment for the treatment for depression. It was the replacement for the old shock therapy, the electroconvulsive therapy. When I looked at it, I thought, this is interesting, but I would never use it on a baby. Has anybody done it in a low energy way, a low energy intensity? And it turned out that nobody had, which really shocked me. And so then I met a radio frequency electrical engineer. We created the first NeuroField stimulator, which was a really low energy electromagnetic field stimulator. And I see a question forming on you.
No, I got a lot of questions. They're piling up. Keep going. You can see it happening. I know.
Yeah. No, it was really cool because this thing was really, really low intensity. And you actually get more EMF exposure when you stick your head in the refrigerator looking for food than when this thing turned on. But the difference is that we could actually focus the EMF frequency of the stimulation. So we could tell the computer what to give you. And what I had learned was that the brain is a copycat. And if you show it even a weak EMF field, the brain will actually copy it and replicate it. So essentially what you could do is entrain it. You could rehabilitate it. You could put it on a treadmill and have it run at a certain speed for a certain period of time, and that would help to rehabilitate it. That's kind of the nutshell, beginning. Yeah. And so I developed it, and it worked.
That's awesome.
Remarkably, he started to, he was in the first percentile for his functioning. And then just last year, he graduated with a bachelor's of science in archaeology.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. That's something else.
Right. And that kind of it just unleashed this thing where we never looked back. And, I was getting my board certifications in quantified EEG, and my supervisor out of the Utah University School of Medicine, who was a real influential person on me, said, you have to release this. I had no intention of releasing NeuroField or putting it out there. And he was like, you have an ethical obligation to do so. Because the thing worked. I was like, oh my God, no, but we did it. And then it's been this almost intoxicating thing where we have continuously found new innovations and new ways of approaching the brain. And we're on the final frontier of this amazing galaxy of information that is, some of the most complex noise in the known universe. 85 billion neurons, 100 trillion synaptic and dendritic connections that creates over 7 quadrillion events per second. Bam. That just happens, right? And so when you get hit with something like that, we're just enamored with the brilliance of this. And we continue to go headlong into it because not only are we, finding these just miraculous things and understanding human potential in a way that we've never really understood before, but the innovations and the technology that we continue to produce just continues to wow us. Because we went forward with, after the first stimulator, we made 4 more EMF stimulators. And then we added a cranial stimulator. And then we added a photobiomodulation stimulator.
Wow.
We put them all together into the same technology where we could fire them off all at the same time. And then we added AI and used AI to help us quantify the data so that it could help us to make choices about the brain that we couldn't see with the naked eye.
Mm-hmm.
that's what we've been doing.
Well, yes, there's so many questions. I don't know where to start. First of all, you guys throw out tools that I don't know that everybody, I mean, they kind of maybe know, like EEG, EMF. Well, let me just, to back up for a minute, EEG standing for, it's basically measures and records the electric activity of the brain, I presume. And EMF is the electromagnetic field. And there's PEMF that is pulsed electromagnetic field. Could you just extrapolate on that a little bit, just for our listeners that don't do this every day?
Sure. Tiff, why don't you take EEG, since you probably do it better than me? Yeah.
We're just watching, the swapping of sodium and calcium along an axon, right? So it's electrochemical, right? But essentially every time we see the membrane potential lower, we see a firing occur. And basically what we're recording the electrical potentials that are happening at the bark of the brain, at the cortex, and we're picking it up through the skin, the skull, the dura, the meninges, right? And it is the seminal text to an individual. And this is where this is actually somewhat provocative. And it's, in my opinion, it's interesting that EEG and the deep analysis of EEG isn't more widely known, but of all the ways in which normal arrives via EEG, what we do is we look at it first with our naked eye, and then we can decompose it with different methods of quantification to understand why a person is showing what they show, why their symptoms are what they are. And so that's EEG. Hopefully I didn't just confuse you further.
No, but it is deep. Anything else on EEG? What I was going to ask, or the follow-up question is, in everything you guys are talking about, all I can think about here is, like, we're setting up neural networks for AI and everything else like that. I don't know a lot of people doing this. It would seem like we know less about our own brains than we do about the neural networks that are supposed to mimic those brains. You guys are going deeper, which is fantastic. But why is there an inception point here that make it now's the time, or have we been ignoring this field? I'm just curious what you guys think about that.
Oh, no, you hit it right on the head. I think it's been a maturation process. With the hardware and the software over, I can reflect back 35 years now and, watching this field grow. And I can tell you that both the hardware and software has grown exponentially. Better amplifiers for measuring the brain, more, the resolution is higher. They're quieter, they're more specific, they're more precise. We've built 3 different amplifiers. We have one called the Q21. It's an FDA cleared amp, and it is the audiophile's dream because it can really get down to the nitty gritty in measuring the brain in a very precise way. So that's really evolved over the last 30 years. And then the software, computational neuroscience methodologies have grown and advanced considerably over the last 25 years. We use methods that were developed at the UC San Diego Swartz Center for Computational Neuroscience, and programs there and for mathematics there that have been used in academia around the world and have been tested thousands of times. So they've gone through ground truth testing a lot in the research. And so these formulas have been hammered out so that they can be precise and accurate. And so, EEG used to get a bad, people would say, oh, it's not really good for doing analysis of the brain, or you can only see certain things. And they didn't know about all these innovations that have been taking place over the last 30 years. How do we measure the system? What modalities do we use to actually compute what we're seeing? Looking at metrics like power, absolute power, electrical power in the brain, conductivity or coherence, phase, our systems in the brain in time with each other. And as, the research got better with EEG, MRI research also, got better. And so, the modular aspects of the brain were discovered. People started to understand hub systems better, and they started to understand networks better. And so, the EEG world said, oh, that's great. How do they talk to each other? The temporal resolution of EEG is greater than that of an MRI. And so when you want to look at communications and phase dynamics and power dynamics, EEG is what you use to look at it. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of those innovations, this is what really sparked my interest. I was like, wow, how do we do that? How do we actually, read that system and get a better take on how it's actually working? And so we made a pipeline where we measure 10 minutes of eyes up and 10 minutes of eyes closed, and a third test where we have you click on a go stimulus and ignore a no-go stimulus. So we make you actively respond to something in the test. And we can watch how your brain fires over a period of time, and then we can quantify that. Now that helps us to understand functionality in a way that we didn't understand 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And that's the curve is getting more and more vertical in terms of our learning, because we keep on illuminating these things that are absolutely fascinating. I'm so nerding and geeking out about it now because we got this. So we built this AI repository a little over 2 years ago where the NeuroField users were invited to redact personal information and shoot up this information to this cloud-based repository. And based on diagnosis, we put your EEGs in different buckets. Now we're breaking over 5,000 EEGs in this repository, and we're constantly running machine learning on it so that we can pop out different kinds of markers that match you to different kinds of diagnostic profiles. So we don't diagnose you with it, but we say, gosh, this brain looks like something that, sustained a head injury or matches ADHD or depression or, traumatic brain injury. So there's a lot of different things we can match you to. And then we can say, this is how you're a match. Because then we model the brain in 3 dimensions and we say, oh, this brain is a match in this region for this reason. And then we give that to the AI, and then we say to the AI, okay, now help us quantify that. What would it look like in the person? And so then it starts to generate a conceptual understanding, an impression that can be fed back to the user, who then says, oh, wow, this matches your complaint. And now when we match the complaint, then the AI takes it the next step. Now we've built an actual protocol generator that uses the NeuroField protocols that Tiff and I have built over the years and says, apply this in these electrode locations for this period of time. And this is the rationale behind it, and this is what we expect to see.
Man, that's awesome. Not only is it fascinating, it's very timely for me. In my small little brain, I'm reading, I don't know if you've read this. Surely you've read this. Have you read the book Whole Brain Living? Whole Brain Living?
Who's it by?
By Jill Bolte Taylor.
I know Jill Bolte Taylor well. Yeah, I've read that. But I love her. Yeah.
I don't know if it's the best read, but it's the most fascinating book. Basically, you may know this then. She talks about 4 characters of the brain. She had I think it was a stroke. Mm-hmm. So she's a neuroscientist. Mm-hmm. So she has a stroke that affects the the left side of her brain. Mm-hmm. So she loses the left side of her brain for like eight weeks or something. But so she can watch this. She's watching herself, if you will, because she can still function, but she loses the left side. So she loses speech. She loses the ability to remember where she lives, her phone number, but she keeps the right side, which is she's totally happy. She's like, things are all good. It'll work out, because she doesn't have the left side being the planner and the protector, and the right side being the explorer and the connector, as she describes it. And she describes this brain huddle when you're too far in one quadrant. She says it's actually 4 characters and you got to work together with them. Mm. And so I'm like interpreting what she had here. And then as I listen to you, we should be able to figure some of this stuff out. I don't know if that resonates with you, but I thought it's a fascinating book. It's a really fascinating book.
Yeah, she's a beautiful way of describing it. It's actually quite spiritual when she talks about moving into the right hemisphere of the brain and how, there's a boundarylessness around that hemisphere, whereas the left is syntax and semantics and language and reading and writing. And you're right, things like memory and numbers. And the pathology that you're talking about, however, is a stroke and a hemorrhagic stroke, right? Yeah. And so that will certainly have a signature, and that is abnormal. That's an abnormal finding. I would say 90% of the people that walk in the door are, it's more mental health issues. So by the neurologist standards, they wouldn't have an abnormal EEG, right? They might get a total green light.
Yeah.
That's where this is interesting, right? Because not only is this a multimodal approach of addressing mental illness and then some other things, right? Like Nick said, head injury and age-related cognitive decline. It's multimodal, meaning all these different stimulation modalities are pieced together, but then it's personalized. It's personalized to you or to whomever is sitting in front of us. So that's where it's very clinical. And we're seeing an explosion in research interest, just brand new explosion in research interest around personalized neurostimulation. But the multimodal aspect of things is also nascent in its evolution as a field. And so we're actually, Nick and I are at I'd like to think we're at the tip of the spear or the peak of the wave in terms of having done this for, 15, him longer than I, plus years. So the personalized multimodal neurostimulation revolution, if I may be so bold, it's upon us, it's coming. And there's folks that use NeuroField all over the world, which is cool. But it's novel, as you noticed earlier. Yeah.
Let me list off a spectrum of issues, and I'll pause, and you can tell me if what you're doing is targeted for these. Like, by example, anxiety and depression, PTSD, trauma, traumatic brain injuries, concussions, insomnia, cognitive optimization. I'll pause there. Are those all fit within your remit, or do you say, well, this is in, this is out, or did I miss some critical ones?
All of those are in. TBI, depending on the severity of it, would be a longer case. But otherwise, I mean, anxiety, mood disorders, low-hanging fruit.
It seems like, I don't want to get us in the weeds here, but anxiety is on the rise. I mean, like significantly. I mean, more than I've ever seen. Maybe people just hit it before. I don't know. But, you know, I have 3 daughters and I've got friends that have daughters, boys, doesn't matter. Are you guys seeing this, or is it just?
Oh, yeah. I mean, fear is one of the roots of anxiety. And there's a lot of things to be afraid of in the world right now. And so, you know, that's one of the things I think that generates it, but also other things as well. You know, the way you think about yourself, the way, you know, things happen in your life that can produce anxiety. I mean, all of those are there. We address that quite a bit, you know, all sorts of situational things that can happen to you. You know, alongside working next to Tiff here in Santa Barbara, I'm also the executive director of a neuroscience hospital in Florida called FHE Health. And it's a, 185 bed inpatient, 250 bed outpatient. And there's a program there called Shatterproof. Shatterproof is a first responder program, and they specialize in opioid addiction, PTSD, anxiety, depression. And I've treated a lot of people that have, for the last 10 years that go through that program. And we see a lot of those kinds of disorders. Fortunately, we have data that shows that not only can we help to reduce the symptoms associated with those diagnoses, but we actually can help them to stabilize for long-term gain.
Look, let me ask you this question, and then I want to dive into like the why, the how, and the what. That's the only way I know how to do this.
Sure.
But I want to make sure I get this out. I think you had like 3 areas, which was NeuroField, Inc., NeuroField, Neurotherapy, in the School of Neurotherapy. Can you explain the 3? Are those the right 3? Mm-hmm. And how do they work together? Tiff, why don't you take that one?
The oldest is NeuroField, Inc., the hardware software company. That's Nick's company, right? Before we got married, I had a clinic that's now called NeuroField Neurotherapy. So that's the brick and mortar, right? That's where people come to get treated in Santa Barbara. And then the third is an educational company where Nick and I and actually other educators teach people how to do what we do. How to read brain data, and how to apply different forms of neuromodulation.
Let's talk a little bit about the why, and I'll stick with you, Tiff, on this one. I know you've said, because I did a little research here, you said the data doesn't lie. So when a patient comes to you suffering from trauma, brain fog, whatever the case may be, you're trying to really look at the data to be able to identify what the recommendation is, I presume. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. If I was placed on the world to do anything, it's that, and maybe be a mom. But that's, in my opinion, the most interesting and revelatory thing that we do, which is to actually read raw EEG data and understand why the individual is expressing the way that they do. It's actually something that I'm writing a book about. I haven't said this yet out publicly, I don't think. But
well, now it's out there, yes.
Now it's out. 2027 anyway, but it's not really that well done in my opinion, and it's so rich. It's such a rich piece of information. So you come in, and Nick and I can both read blind, meaning we don't actually even need you to sit down in front of me. I can look at the data and say, these are the predispositions and the proclivities. These are hereditable findings. These subtleties indicate X, Y, and Z, and you are your own unique brain print. Right? You have your own unique way of showing up. I mean, anxiety alone, there's at least 11 different profiles for anxiety that I've clocked, right? So there's not just one profile, which is why neuroanalysis is so challenging. And so from that then, and this is where this personalized neurostimulation gets exciting. From that, we can say this brain with these flavors of these symptomatic expressions will respond to this stimulation concoction, and then we can track and we can see within 10 sessions, not just a subjective change, but almost always we see an objective change, a quantitative improvement in the symptoms.
Say more on that concoction, if you will. It's a combined...
Yeah. So there's different cranial electric modalities, but imagine electrodes on your head, right? So now we're using transcranial direct current stimulation, something called alternating current stimulation, which is frequencies. We're using aperiodic noise. Ignore the word noise because there's nothing you can hear, but something called aperiodic noise. It's like it's the 1/f. You probably know what that is, right? The inverse relationship between power and frequency. It's purposeful randomness. And then something called biphasic. We have 3 forms of biphasic. Anyway, so those are all the cranial modalities that we have at our disposal. And then we have PEMF, which is pulsed electromagnetic field. And that's like a soak. So it's electromagnetic. So it's not as focal in terms of its application. And then we have photobiomodulation, which is profound, I think, for many reasons. But I really like the depth that light affords us, right? And so we blend these together to fit the individual who's in front of us. And Nick and I have been doing this for a long time, but this is what we've trained this AI to do it, because our clinicians, there's lots of clinicians that use our stuff, and they've had to keep up with us, and that's annoying, and all the protocols. And so now we've automated it so that, you don't have to keep up with us anymore.
So one more, and then I'll switch to Nick. So if I was coming in for anxiety, or anybody coming in for anxiety, what does the process look like? I say, look, I've got an anxiety problem. I am just over the top. I can't hardly function. Yeah. What would you do? How would this start?
Yeah, you come in, we sit down, we have a chat, a little intake. You get an EEG and an ERP, an event-related potentials test, that go, no go. So we watch your brain under task. We usually do a 45-minute long cognitive assessment. So you're in the clinic for anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. And then you meet us again, or me, let's just say you're working with me, you meet me again, and I walk you through your data. And I say, Al, this is your brain, and this is why you feel the way that you feel, and this is the profile that you have, and this is the flavor of anxiety that you're dealing with. Oh, and I can see here you probably also have, there's likelihood that you have insomnia because you have this marker, this neuromarker that would insinuate that's going on as well. So there might be some things that show up. Now that we know this, which I think for most people is really very, comforting. For some people it's disturbing, but for most it's comforting. This is what we're going to do. And then you go into one of our rooms in our clinic, and you sit down, and we attach things to your head, and you chill and sit in front of Netflix or on your email or on your phone, or you meditate or whatever you'd like to do. It's very passive. And we like to work with people intensively. And so we will see you every day, often. We don't have to do it this way, but we found it works best to see you in consecutive days for 10 days in a row. Monday through Friday. And that cumulative build, right, has been proven in neurostimulation studies, but it's how this stuff works. It's like building a muscle. And so then we get another map at 10 days in and see how you're doing, see how you're different. And you and I have a powwow, and I say, look, you're doing great. This is amazing. And usually you're going to feel the effects as well. You'll say, yeah, I noticed that I didn't freak out at that guy that cut me off the other day. Or, my wife says I'm a lot nicer.
How does the data transition into the diagnosis? That's what I'm missing. I mean, so you see the data, you go, okay, we see this, you can't sleep. I can say you probably struggle. Oh, yeah, you are struggling with sleep. I knew it. All right, but here's what I recommend based on where your data, because we got to move some of these neurons or do that, whatever. How does that work?
How does the data translate into the diagnosis?
Yes.
I mean, it's neuromarkers, right? So the way that people make diagnoses with data mental health care practitioners is a set of symptoms. It's not rocket science, right? So that alone will satisfy, needing to diagnose, but we can see the neuromarkers that actually quantify the symptomology.
Yeah, we're clinicians, we're licensed healthcare professionals. And so, between the two of us, we have, over 30 years of experience working with clinical mental health cases.
I mean, more than that, actually.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I know. And so,
what about the naysayers? Let's just put it. So Nick, so if I'm out there, maybe I'm a psychologist listening in here, and they're saying, oh, data smata. I've been working long as these, I don't need all this data. I don't need to put anything on anybody's head. I can tell them exactly what they need to do. What would your response to that be? I bet you got it.
I would say you're shooting in the dark, and it's, you're making a subjective assessment of what's happening in the person based on what they say to you. And what we're doing is we actually measure the organ that we're treating.
Yeah.
And unlike many other professions, we're not medicating the organ without ever looking at it. We're not making a diagnosis without looking at it. We're actually doing a much more thoughtful approach to the human brain than anybody ever has. And we have data to say, oh, wow, you have this happening. Let's say you lost the ability to enunciate and speak words, and you had sustained an injury to your left frontal lobe. Well, there's a structure there called Broca's area. That's the part of your brain that's responsible for controlling the muscles that allow you to speak, right? And so all of a sudden, you know what you want to say, but you can't say it because your mouth doesn't work because the muscles aren't working. Well, we can measure that and see it. And if we can see it, then we can correlate that structure is not working to your actual symptom. So then we can say, oh, that makes sense. And then we have a target. And once we know where the target is, we've actually built a simulation targeting tool that can target that specific region. It'll tell us exactly where to put the electrodes, and we can run a low-level stimulation through that region and rehabilitate it and get it working again.
Do you ever have anybody coming in, though, that's like, hey, let's just stick with anxiety since it was the top of the list. I got a lot of anxiety. You look at their EEG and you're like, this is not what I normally see. Mm-hmm. What are they talking about?
Yeah, well, it's never just one thing. I mean, we are so complex when it comes to the feelings that we experience. The brain profiles that we typically see are very, very sophisticated. There's a lot of pieces to it. So it's not just anxiety. We might see your anxiety. We might see depression. We may see areas of your brain where hub systems are not communicating with each other. So there's poor processing. So, what you interpret as anxiety psychologically is actually poor communication between modular systems in the brain. And when we correct that, all of a sudden you go, wow, I feel a lot better.
Now, look, I'm obviously not a brain scientist here, so this may be like a silly question, but when you look at it and you can examine the brain, what is the accuracy if you see these different elements? You're able to say, look, I know you've got anxiety. I can see it right here. That's 100% the case. And I know you also have blah, blah, blah. I mean, how accurate? I mean, like you say, it's very complex. Mm-hmm. So how do you know the diagnosis is spot on relative to what you're seeing?
Absolutely. That's a great question. What we do is actual overkill, because when you look at the EEG, you're taking every second of EEG recording is 256 samples of the brain. We take 10 minutes of it eyes open, 10 minutes of it eyes closed, and 15 minutes of it in the event-related potential task. Combined, that's over 120,000 observations of the brain. So when we make a statement about and we quantify that, when we make a statement about that, the accuracy of that observation and the chance of error sneaking into that observation is about 1 in 100,000. So I would actually bank on that statistically. Now, of course, artifact can step in. There's a lot of different things that can skew the data that we're trained to see. Mm-hmm. And so we use independent components analysis, decomposition, to be able to remove different types of abnormalities or artifacts from the data so that we can get a clearer view of it. We also use multimodal analysis methods, not just one, but differential analysis, to be able to test our hypothesis using different kinds of mathematical formulas, not just one. Then we also take, subjective measures like the PHQ-9 to measure depression, the GAD-7 for anxiety. We use a cognitive assessment that tests your different, areas of cognitive ability, like memory, executive functioning, stuff like that. So we're not just banking it just on EEG, but we're using a whole bunch of different methods and combining those together to generate an opinion. Plus, the clinical training that we have, to be able to, that you typically learn. I'm a psychologist by training. And so, being able to sit down with somebody and get a sense of where they are, mental status examination. There's different things that I'll do that I combine with that kind of assessment. So it's never just we're just going to rely on the EEG. Actually, we never diagnose just from the EEG by itself, although we're getting pretty darn close to being able to do so. But we still maintain a very rigorous method of analysis that pulls in a lot of different pieces.
One more for you, and then I'll go back to Tiff here. You mentioned this earlier a little bit on terms of how artificial intelligence is changing the game. I got to believe it's highly around speed, accuracy, being able to take data that would take forever to do. Now you put AI behind it, you're able to get it faster and more accurate. I want you to answer the question. How is artificial intelligence changing the game around the NeuroField?
Well, it's I'm really excited about it. I know Tiff is. It is able. What we constructed is a method for feeding it data and then putting bumper rails around it so that we prevent it from being able to hallucinate and create opinions and stuff that it's very good at doing when it doesn't know what to do. We spent a lot of time constructing this model where we give it an enormous amount of data, and it can hyper quantify that data in moments. Now, the real trick here is, how do we let it do that, and what do we want to see from it? And so this is where, it really is a responsibility. With the data set we have now is huge. It's over 5,000 people with over 6,000, almost 6,500 records in it. And, when you take a single recording, 10 minutes, eyes open, eyes closed, and 15-minute ERP, like I said, you have over 120,000 observations of the brain for a single person. Now multiply that by over 5,000. So then what you do is you get this really high resolution look at what the brain is doing. But this is incredibly complex. And so what the AI can do is it can look at network communications in ways that we haven't been able to see before. And it's actually putting things on the table saying, oh, by the way, you might want to look at this frequency in this network, in this location, because it's not performing the way it should based on the population repository that we have. You fell into the 40th percentile or the 30th percentile based on the group that we have. So it can tell us when specific frequencies are high or low. It can tell us the kind of the flavor of the communications between these network hubs and when they're working well versus when they're not. And so I'm really excited about that because, when you look at good brain health, it's all about timing. Phase dynamics in the brain are incredibly important. And so when these modular systems are in time with each other and they're talking to each other in the right way, you are firing off on, all the cylinders. You're able to utilize your maximum potential. And when that occurs, you're feeling good, you're pulling up information well, you're processing well, you're conceptualizing well, you're flowing well. And this makes all the difference, and the AI is capable of helping us to see those phase amplitude couplings, these dynamic communication responses that we couldn't see in other ways, unless we actually sat down and did a lot of computational neuroscience analysis by hand.
That's amazing. Look, I believe in the data, no question. I mean, I'm asking the questions to challenge you guys a bit, but
oh, yeah, bring them on. I'm more than happy to take the Pepsi challenge.
Yeah, look, I remember reading about this is like before AI, they were talking about identifying cancers, and they had this test, and they tested all these doctors about the color, all this different stuff, and they gave them the cards, and then they gave them the cards again, and they didn't even agree with themselves. But then you put it in a process or put the data behind it, and it becomes more consistent, and then it helps, it help a clinician to make sure that they're making the right recommendations one way or another. Totally get it. Hey, Tiff, I want to ask you this. And yeah, again, I'm uneducated on this, but I know you are highly respected for your work in independent component analysis. You may have mentioned this a little bit in raw EEG data. Could you explain that to us and what that really means?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the raw EEG is, think of it as a narrative. Think of it as a story of an individual, right? So you're looking at the data, and you can really ultimately get a feel for what it's like to be this person. It is in a way like sight reading eventually, right? But initially it's like learning phonemes, right? So you look at the raw data, and so that's in a very brief nutshell how to read raw data. I mean, there's a morphological meaning to the data. There's so much information just in the raw. Without the raw, honestly, I would be lost, because the quantification follows the raw. Right? You need to know what it looks like, the guts of it, before you actually can understand what the quantified version means. Independent components analysis, what that is it's pulling out spatially and spectrally independent components from the brain. So instead of just looking at the raw, now I'm pulling out this pattern or that pattern or that pattern. And there's an analogy that's used called the cocktail party phenomenon, where let's say we're at a cocktail party, all of us, with maybe a dozen other people. And every one of us, our voice has its own register, its own prosody, its own tenor, gate, volume, pitch, so on and so forth. Well, using independent components analysis, we can locate each individual. We can know their rank in terms of how loudly and expressively, how differently they talk, the degree of variability to their voice. We can see where they are, what they look like, and how they rank relative to the others. That's independent components analysis, essentially. It's using a process to find different patterns in the brain.
In a three-dimensional structure.
Wow.
So you can find it at depth, which is a big deal. And it's a spectral signature. So it's like the sound of your voice. It's not just a single frequency. And this makes all the difference in terms of the dynamics and the communications of a system.
I have so many questions, but we're going to run out of time, and I promise to get you out of here. So here's what I'm going to do. First of all, I got one more. This is not a simple question, but it's probably a silly one when it comes to you. But how do you define a healthy brain?
That's just it. I would say 90% of the people that come in, they have normal brains, right? And so, is it healthy? Well, I mean, let's say you have anxiety. Do you have a healthy brain? I mean, we're talking about semantics, right? Like. Yeah. Probably. You're probably in okay health. Maybe you have excess cortisol, and you happen to have a high stress life. Are you healthy? Do you have a healthy brain? Yeah. I mean, I think what's more interesting is this idea of mental illness, right? I would say that that's actually the outlier here. But that's, again, it's getting into semantics. So when I talk about data, I talk about high vibe and low vibe expressions of things. So for instance, there's different naturally occurring phenotypes that are predisposed to anxiety. Are they all going to manifest anxiety? No, they're not. Some of them will tip in that direction given, just growing up in a challenging household, let's say, and having been exposed to developmental trauma.
Yeah.
So
a healthy brain would just stick with a hydrated brain. I don't. It's going to be tough. No, I get. That's why I asked the question, because you could come in and have all kinds of ailments, but your brain still could be healthy. It's
really interesting. In the world of mental health, I mean, everybody looks at the brain from an illness perspective, instead of a wellness perspective. What is it like when you're really feeling good? What is it like when you're functioning well? We can look at a brain and say, yeah, this brain isn't functioning well based on your symptom set, and here's why, because we're measuring it.
And, chances are that this quote unquote illness, we're going to call it, or whatever, the symptomology, I'll say, that you've developed it's a compensatory mechanism to life. You've been dealt some slings and arrows, and, your system has figured out a way to navigate to get you where you are at this moment in time. I mean, and that's where we step in.
Where can folks reach you? I want to make sure I get that. Where can folks go to find you?
We're in Santa Barbara, and NeuroField is the company. NeuroField Neurotherapy is the clinic.
Yep.
And you know what? If someone says, yeah, but I'm in New York, or we have clinicians, we have really actually very high quality clinicians that use our stuff all over the country and world. We're in 42 countries. And so we can navigate folks to some decent clinicians as well.
NeuroFieldNeurotherapy.com.
All right. Put that in the show notes. Look, I only got 1 minute, but could I trouble you for a quick rapid fire? Now, this is a rapid fire in 1 minute.
Go.
What's the most misunderstood thing about the human brain?
Well,
it's not easy.
That's a big one.
Rapid fire.
I think that, I think that people don't understand how much capacity that we actually have. And I think one of the most misunderstood things is that people limit their understanding of it. They just say it's capable of doing X, Y, and Z, and they stop looking at it in a more deep way.
All right, Tiff, what is the one lifestyle habit that helps nurture your brain?
Exercise.
Exercise. That's easy. See how quick that was, Nick? She's right on top of it.
Easy one. That was a slow ball. Come on.
What is the biggest, all right, this is Nick, yours. What is the biggest mistake that, we'll call them green clinicians, make when analyzing a brain?
They use methods that are not scientifically valid, and they don't necessarily get the appropriate training that they need to understand computational neuroscience. And so they're misled by private vendors that have, fiduciary interests in their products like we do, but they don't go through the ethical stages of actually training them correctly.
Tiff, what's the one thing or advice you'd give people that are aging to keep their brain strong?
Exercise. You do great work with memory, I'll say that. But yeah, definitely exercise, diet, sleep. It's really simple about it.
Exercise, diet, sleep. And last question, where do you think we're going to be like 5 years from now? Based on some of the research you're doing, what excites you? Where do you think that we'll land 5 years? If I was to do this 5 years and have the same conversation.
It's my hope that within 5 years, this will be a standard of care. I will be within 10 years. That this will be a standard of care, right? That people are going to be moving away from pharmacology to address mental health issues, and they're going to be moving more towards modalities like this. But I do think that multimodal neurostimulation is coming. It's just a matter of time.
The wave is visible on the horizon now, and we are there. And it's really exciting because I get a shiver just thinking about it, because it's taken a long time to get to this spot. But in 5 years, the model is going to exponentially grow. And when it does, and it hits the vision that we have in mind, it is the portal of access for care.
Data, AI, science, tooling. This is fantastic. Nick, Tiff, thank you. I had to hurry to get all the stuff in. I may have to have you on again. I got so many more questions, but I appreciate you guys are on the leading edge. So listeners, if you're listening, you know where to reach them now. Thank you guys for being here so much. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
Hey, listeners, hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. You need anything, you know we're here for you. Have a good one. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye.